This is that bee man out in the bee yard. I get a kick out of saying that. We're just going to have a look today. I've had a really tough winter and a tough spring, and I need to see how these bees are coming along. They don't seem to be building very fast. There's not much activity, so I just need to take a deep dive in a few of them and check how the brood is coming along. So we'll get at it right here. A bit of activity in here. I'm going to give them a little smoke. I sure wouldn't call this a strong colony. They've been eating up their patty. Of course, they're not finished though. I don't know what's going on here. Wow. It's discouraging to see colonies just struggling like this. Let me show you how I get into the hive. You know, you need to keep your frames tight against each other, centered in the box if you can. This one's not quite centered, they're pushed over to the middle here. But I've done a lot of bee inspecting for the province, and I have to work hives that sometimes are pretty hard to get into. So I'll bring this end frame over here right tight against the outside. So the bees still have room in here to walk around. I haven't squashed any bees there. The very, very most important thing is don't kill the queen. I can look down in here and I can see the cluster here. So the queen should be in here somewhere. But she's a tricky old queen. You can count on her fooling you some of the time. Okay, so once I've moved this frame out of the way, I want to scrape the inside face of the top bar. Scrape any knobs of comb off there. Doesn't really matter where that stuff goes, but then pry the next one over, good and tight. Don't bother scraping the one. I'm going to pull this second one, so don't bother scraping that, but scrape the third one. Just scrape that comb off. So what happens here is, if there's any comb like that on this third frame, when I pull this, that comb will scrape down the side of this frame. But now that I've taken it off, even though I haven't cleaned the second frame, the frame I'm pulling, it comes out of there quite nicely. It hasn't been scraped on anything. Look at that, a full frame of feed. I'm going to call that feed because that is syrup from last fall that they're eating. I'm taking a cursory check for the queen. She shouldn't be over here, but she's surprised me before. There's some pollen pants running around over here on this side. That's nice to see. Pollen is baby food, and babies is what we need. This next frame I can see from the top that it's largely feed. So again, a cursory look for the queen, some more pollen pants. They've eaten this feed out of these cells and filled it with new pollen, which is just wonderful to see. So they've got a nice little pollen flow going on, and they're taking advantage of that. Now this next frame you may or may not recognize. It's a green frame. This one's a little bleached, but it's a green frame. And I want to look on this and see if there's any eggs or anything in here, which I do not see eggs. So the difference of this frame is this is a drone frame. The cells are large, and the queen will only lay drones in this frame. I need some drones. I want to make some queens. To make queens, you need drones. So here we go with the next frame. This is an Apivar strip. It's a mite control. It's well stuck in there, so I'll just continue on here. An old beekeeper told me when I started, always setting my hive tool down, you know, and then you have to reach for it. So you forget where it is sometimes. An old beekeeper told me, learn to work with your hive tool in your hand. I've actually worn out gloves where the hive tool is. It's probably a little easier for me than some. I've got larger hands than average and longer fingers, so it might be easier, but I'm just doing this when I'm picking up these frames. I use this for the frame, hang on to the hive tool here. Your danger is if your hive tool gets like this, then you'll start squashing bees and stuff while you're paying attention here. You're not paying attention over there. So we'll pull this out. Let's see. An entire frame of pollen. Entire frame of pollen. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Frame of pollen this side, and there's a little bit of cap brood here. Wow. So this tells me a story. This tells me a story. The queen laid this up in the center here. Cap brood, that's 9 days plus ago. So she laid that up, and then the pollen flow hit, and the bees started bringing that pollen. And they've been bringing it prolifically. Just smoke them to go down so I don't squash many. I try not to squash bees. Sometimes you squash bees. It's not what you're trying to do, but okay. So that brood pattern is not the best one I've seen, but the empty cells here have larvae. Some very, very young larvae, and some a little bit older. Actually, I think I see some eggs over in here. There's the eggs and larvae up in here still. That's great. Again, I'm always kind of watching for the queen. Some of my queens are marked, some are not. Some say look down the profile of the frame, and you should be able to spot the big bee. I'm not very good at spotting the queen, so maybe not the best one to ask for advice on that. Very young larvae and eggs all in here, eggs and whatnot in here, young larvae. This is going quite well. A few more days, that'll all be capped, and 2 weeks after that we have emergence. Not quite 2 weeks. 12 days. 12 days after capping, we get emergence. Cap day 9, emerge day 21. Trying to get that wax off of that toothpick. Okay. Alright, same thing. It's a little spotty. She had a tough time getting going, I guess. Lots of pollen around here. That's textbook pollen right on the outside of the brood. Lots of eggs and young larvae in all the empty spots. So a little spotty overall, but it's okay because it's spring and she's filled in all the empty spaces. So she's laying just fine. Okay. So again, all these empty cells over here, all full of eggs. Very, very, 24-hour, 36-hour larva in there. This makes me happy. I'm encouraged. Springtime is a tough time on bees and beekeeper alike. Fat Bee Man says don't scrape the top bars because you'll cut the queen's head off. I don't know, I've never cut the queen's head off, but he's been beekeeping a lot longer than I have, so maybe he's cut the queen's head off before. Can't say. So I'm not impressed by the number of bees in this hive. It's a pretty warm day, so the foragers are likely out. Again, a band of pollen here. There's a little bit of nectar even there. I've got some feeding going on. And eggs and young larvae on this side. That's looking really nice. That's looking really nice. And this is all eggs and young larvae up in here and on this side. It's looking good. So I wasn't counting, actually started here. So that's the 4th frame of brood. Let's see what we've got on number 5 here. Okay, so there's pollen. I see eggs here. I see very young, I think I see very young larvae. Very young larvae. You can tell they're very young larvae because they're just a little too small to see. Which sounds kind of weird, but once you see them, you'll know. I suspect there's something in here, but there's no bees on it, so there shouldn't be anything in that frame. So she's got a whole, the half of that frame and this frame she hasn't even touched. So hopefully she'll work her way over there. What I'm going to do, I'm going to move a feed frame. I'll just put this honey frame that I pulled. Okay, I'll put this feed frame in here, in the other end. Not sure why, I just want to do that. Okay, having a problem here. There's a clip, a U-clip at the bottom holds these boxes on. It sticks up about 2 inches. The end frame sometimes gets caught on that. And that's what's happening in this case. So, if that happens, you can't get that frame in there. Or pull the end one. Second one, that is. Put this one down in there and push it over. Now I can put that second one back in here. Okay. So, nice and tight. Draw those up nice and tight. Then come the other side and center them best you can. And that'll make your management job a whole lot easier. I'm gonna put these scraps back on here. I don't know if they even want them, but because there's some pollen now. We have very few dandelions just starting, which is wonderful to see. A little bit of nectar sharing right over here at the end of my hive tool. I don't know if you can see that, but see, they're sharing what they brought in. Well, it's you know, that's progressing. I sure would like to see more bees in there, but it is what it is on this case.